The morning sun cast long purple shadows across the crystalline courtyards of Nexara Academy, the most prestigious educational institution on the planet Zelthara. Students from dozens of species hurried between the towering spire-like buildings, their varied forms creating a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes against the iridescent architecture. Kira pressed herself against the smooth wall of the Cultural Studies building, her webbed fingers trembling as she clutched her data pad to her chest. The Aquarian girl's gill slits fluttered nervously along her neck, a telltale sign of distress among her people. Her large, dark eyes scanned the courtyard, searching for any sign of them. She almost made it. "Well, well, look what crawled out of the tide pools," came the sneering voice of Vex, a tall Craxian whose chitinous exoskeleton gleamed like polished obsidian in the morning light. His mandibles clicked together in amusement as he stepped into Kira's path, blocking her route to the marine biology complex. Behind him emerged his usual crew, Zara, a serpentine Thessian whose scales shifted from blue to aggressive red as she smiled wickedly, and Mach, a hulking Brutarian whose forearms cracked his knuckles in anticipation. They had been making Kira's life miserable for 3 cycles now, ever since she had accidentally spilled bio-solution on Vex during Advanced Hydroponic Systems class. "Please," Kira whispered, her voice barely audible above the general chatter of students moving to their morning classes. "I haven't done anything to you today." Vex's laugh was like grinding metal. "Today? Oh, sweet little fish girl. You exist. That's enough." He gestured with one clawed appendage toward the central fountain that dominated the Academy's main courtyard. The Fountain of Enlightenment, as it was officially known, was a magnificent piece of engineering that recycled water through various gravitational fields and dimensional pockets, creating an ever-changing display of liquid artistry. It was also where they dunked her, every single day. "No," Kira backed away, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "Not today, please. I have the xenobiology presentation this morning. Professor Valdris said—" "Professor Valdris can kiss my armored thorax," Vex interrupted, lunging forward to grab Kira's arm. His grip was like a mechanical vice, and she cried out as he began dragging her toward the fountain. "Come on, boys and girls. Time for our little fish to go swimming." Other students in the courtyard either looked away uncomfortably or watched with morbid curiosity. None intervened. This had become a daily ritual that everyone simply accepted. The teachers were rarely around during the morning transition period, and most students figured it wasn't their problem. Kira struggled against Vex's grip, but her people were built for grace in water, not strength on land. "Stop, please. I'll do your thermodynamics homework for a week." "Already got some first year to do that for free," Zara hissed, her forked tongue flicking out to taste Kira's fear pheromones. "Besides, this is much more fun." They reached the fountain's edge. The water today was cycling through a beautiful pattern of spirals and floating spheres, each droplet catching the light like tiny stars. It would have been breathtaking under normal circumstances. "In you go, fish girl," Vex said, positioning himself to throw her into the deeper section of the fountain, where the water was currently being held in a complex loop by the gravitational generators. That's when someone cleared their throat behind them. "Excuse me," came a voice in accented galactic standard, "but I think you dropped something?" The bullies turned to see a figure they had never noticed before. He was roughly humanoid, but somehow wrong. Too tall for most species, but not tall enough to be a Bratari. His skin was an odd pinkish-brown color, and he had patches of brown fiber growing from the top of his head. Most disturbing of all, he only had 2 arms, and his eyes were set forward in his skull like a predator. "What species is that?" Mach rumbled in his deep voice, releasing his hold on Kira's other arm. "I'm human," the stranger said simply. "Marcus Chen, exchange student from Earth. Just arrived last night." He was holding something in his hand, a small device that Vex recognized as his personal communicator. "Human?" Zara's scales rippled with confusion. Never heard of them. What backwater planet did you crawl out of? Marcus smiled, and something about that expression made Kira's spine tingle. It didn't reach his eyes. Oh, just a little blue-green world in the Orion Arm. Pretty quiet place. Now, about this. He held up the communicator. You dropped it while you were handling your friend here. Vex released Kira and stalked toward Marcus, his mandibles clicking aggressively. I didn't drop anything, freak. That's mine. And you stole it. Interesting perspective, Marcus said, still smiling that cold smile. I prefer to think I was returning lost property. But hey, if you want to call the campus security and explain how I somehow pickpocketed you while you were forcibly dragging that girl to the fountain, be my guest. The Craxian's exoskeleton flushed a darker color. Are you threatening me? Just making conversation, Marcus replied, tossing the communicator up and catching it casually. The device looked tiny in his strange, five-fingered hands. Though I am curious about something. Is this a cultural thing? The daily fountain dunking? Because where I come from, we have a different name for forcing someone underwater against their will. Mock cracked his knuckles again, all four arms working in sequence. You're new, so I'll explain. The fish girl is bottom of the food chain here. We keep her in her place. Smart aliens mind their own business. Ah, Marcus nodded thoughtfully. And what place is that exactly? Wet, Zara laughed, her scales shifting to an amused yellow. Very, very wet. Every day, Vex added, puffing out his chest. For the last 3 cycles, and for the next 3 cycles, until she transfers out or drops out. Doesn't matter to me. Marcus looked at Kira, who was standing frozen by the fountain's edge, water dripping from her hair where she had been splashed during the struggle. And you're okay with this? He asked her directly. Kira opened her mouth, then closed it. In all the times this had happened, no one had ever asked her that question. No, I'm not okay with it. Shut up, fish girl, Vex snapped. No one asked. I asked, Marcus interrupted quietly. His voice hadn't gotten louder, but somehow it cut through Vex's words like a laser through paper. And she answered, so now I have all the information I need. Information for what? Zara demanded, coiling her lower body in preparation for a strike. Marcus handed the communicator back to Vex, who snatched it away suspiciously. To make an informed decision about what happens next. What happens next? Mock growled. Is you walk away before we decide you need a swim too. Actually, Marcus said, rolling his shoulders in a way that made several joints crack audibly. I was thinking something different. See, I've been traveling for 6 months to get here. 6 months in a cramped transport ship with recycled air and synthetic food. 6 months thinking about how excited I was to experience new cultures and make friends from across the galaxy. He took a step closer to the group, and Kira noticed that he moved differently than anyone she had ever seen. There was something predatory about it, like a hunting sea crawler moving through deep water. And then I get here, Marcus continued, and the first thing I see is 3 large individuals forcing one smaller individual toward a body of water against her will. Now, maybe that's normal on your worlds, but where I come from, we have very specific opinions about that kind of behavior. Your opinions don't matter here, freak, Vex snarled, but Kira noticed he wasn't advancing anymore. Something about the human's posture seemed to be giving him pause. You're probably right, Marcus agreed. I'm just one individual from a species nobody's heard of, from a planet nobody cares about. But you know what? I have a confession to make. Zara's scales were now fluctuating between yellow and red in rapid succession. What? Marcus's smile widened slightly, and for the first time, Kira saw his teeth. They were flat in front, but pointed on the sides, the teeth of something that ate both plants and meat. A true omnivore, like the great predators of her homeworld's ancient seas. "I really don't like bullies," he said softly. The courtyard had gone quiet around them. Other students were beginning to take notice of the confrontation, forming a loose circle at a safe distance. Word was spreading quickly through the crowd. There was a new species on campus, and it was about to tangle with Vex's crew. "Last chance, human," Vex said, trying to inject some authority into his voice. "Walk away." Marcus looked at Kira again. "What's your name?" "Kira," she stammered. "Kira. That's a pretty name. Tell me, Kira, how long have you been holding your breath?" The question was so unexpected that she answered without thinking. "What? I'm not holding my—" "Oh." Her gill slits had been clamped shut due to stress, and she was indeed relying on the small amount of oxygen she could process through her mouth. "About 4 minutes now." Marcus nodded as if this was perfectly normal information. "And how long can your people typically hold their breath?" 15 minutes, maybe 20 if we're relaxed. Why?" "Just curious about lung capacity," Marcus said conversationally. Then, without any warning whatsoever, he turned to Vex and asked, "How long can you hold yours?" Before the Craxian could answer, Marcus moved. Kira's people were among the fastest swimmers in the known galaxy, capable of tracking prey moving at incredible speeds through three-dimensional aquatic environments. Her reaction time was enhanced by millions of years of evolution in the deep oceans of Aquaria. But even she barely tracked the human's movement as he stepped forward, grabbed Vex by the thorax, and lifted the much larger alien completely off the ground. "What the—" Vex began, but his words were cut off as Marcus took 3 quick steps and hurled him directly into the fountain's deepest section. The splash was enormous, sending gravity-twisted water in all directions and completely disrupting the artistic patterns the fountain had been maintaining. Vex surfaced immediately, his exoskeleton streaming with water, mandibles clacking in outrage. "My turn!" Mock roared, all 4 arms swinging toward Marcus in a devastating combination that should have pulverized any opponent. Marcus ducked under the first 2 swings, sidestepped the third, and caught the 4th arm at the wrist. For a moment, the 2 beings stood locked together, the massive Brutarian straining against the human's grip. Then Marcus smiled again and twisted. The sound of Mock's wrist breaking was like snapping wood. The Brutarian's roar of pain echoed across the entire courtyard as Marcus spun him around and sent him crashing into the fountain beside his friend. Zara struck next, her serpentine body uncoiling like a spring to send her fangs toward Marcus's throat. She was fast, faster than most species could even see. Marcus was faster. He caught her just behind the head as she struck, his grip preventing her from using either her fangs or her constricting body. For a moment, they stared at each other, her reptilian eyes wide with shock. "I want you to remember this feeling," Marcus said quietly, so only she could hear. "The feeling of being completely helpless while someone bigger and stronger than you decides what happens to your body." Then he threw her into the fountain with such force that she created a small tidal wave. The entire courtyard was dead silent except for the splashing and cursing coming from the fountain. 3 of the toughest bullies in the academy were floundering in the water, trying to figure out what had just happened to them. Marcus straightened his shirt and turned to Kira, who was staring at him with her mouth open. "So," he said pleasantly, "I'm Marcus. I'm studying xenobiology with a focus on aquatic ecosystems. I hear the program here is supposed to be the best in the galaxy." Kira blinked several times before finding her voice. You just threw them in the fountain." "I did indeed. Seemed appropriate, given the circumstances." He glanced back at the 3 figures now climbing out of the water, all looking considerably less intimidating while dripping wet. "Though I suspect they'll want a rematch once they dry off and figure out what just happened." "Who are you people?" Vex spluttered as he hauled himself over the fountain's edge, his exoskeleton clicking wetly. Marcus considered this question seriously. That's actually pretty complicated. Humans are sort of, well, we're persistence hunters from a high-gravity world with an unusually aggressive biosphere. We're also social pack animals with a strong protective instinct toward perceived in-group members and an equally strong aggressive response toward anything that threatens our pack. He looked at Kira and added, I'm thinking you qualify as pack now. I don't understand half of those words, Kira whispered. The important part, Marcus said, is that where I come from, people who pick on others for fun tend to learn pretty quickly that it's not actually that much fun when someone picks back. More students were gathering now, drawn by the commotion and the unprecedented sight of Vex's crew getting dunked in their own fountain. Whispered conversations rippled through the crowd as various species tried to process what they had just witnessed. Mock was cradling his broken wrist and staring at Marcus with something approaching awe. How did you do that? I outweigh you by 50 standard kilos. Physics, Marcus replied cheerfully. Leverage, momentum, and about 4 billion years of evolution. Plus, I've been in 12 times normal gravity for the last 6 months. You're all operating at roughly 80% of galactic standard gravity here, which feels like swimming through air to me. Vex was shaking water from his sensory appendages and working his mandibles furiously. This isn't over, freak. There are rules here. Consequences. You can't just assault students. You're absolutely right, Marcus agreed. There are rules. Assault is wrong. So is forcing people into water against their will. So is systematic harassment and intimidation of fellow students. He pulled out his own communicator and gestured at the crowd around them. I'm thinking about a dozen people just recorded what happened here. Should be interesting to see how the administration weighs your 3 cycles of bullying against my 30 seconds of fighting back. The threat of administrative review hit all 3 bullies like cold water. Nexara Academy took its reputation seriously, and documented harassment could result in expulsion. Besides, Marcus added, if you really want a rematch, I'm in Dormitory Building 7, Room 423. Feel free to stop by anytime. Bring friends if it makes you feel better. This casual invitation to further violence seemed to confuse them more than anything else that had happened. Zara slithered closer to Vex and hissed something in rapid Thessian. Her scales were now a pale, frightened green. Mock just continued staring at his broken wrist in bewilderment. Come on, Vex finally said to his crew. Let's get out of here. As they squelched away across the courtyard, leaving puddles with every step, the gathered students began to disperse. The show was over, and most of them had classes to get to. Marcus turned back to Kira, who was still standing by the fountain in stunned silence. So, he said, want to grab some breakfast? I hear the cafeteria here serves food suitable for aquatic species, and I've been curious about aquarian cuisine ever since I read about it in the cultural briefing packets. Kira looked at the human, really looked at him for the first time. He was tall and lean, with kind eyes and an easy smile, but underneath that casual demeanor, she could now sense something that reminded her of the great hunters that prowled the deepest trenches of her homeworld. Something that had evolved to be very, very good at survival. Yes, she said finally. I'd like that. But first I have to ask, why? Why did you help me? You don't even know me. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. On my world, we have a saying. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. I guess I just couldn't do nothing. But you could get in trouble. They have friends. Vex's family is connected to the Craxian trade guilds, and Mock's father is in the Brutarian military. They could make your life here very difficult. Probably, Marcus agreed. But here's the thing about humans. We're really, really bad at backing down from fights, especially when we think we're in the right. It's actually one of our worst traits from a survival standpoint. We'll fight things bigger than us, stronger than us, more numerous than us, just because we think we should. He started walking toward the cafeteria, and Kira fell into step beside him. Besides, he added with a grin, something tells me they're not going to be quite as eager to start fights now that they know what humans are capable of. Sometimes all bullies need is to meet something that bullies back harder. As they walked away from the fountain, Kira found herself wondering what other surprises this strange new species might have in store for the galaxy. Something told her that Marcus Chen was just the beginning. The Nexara Academy cafeteria was a marvel of interspecies engineering, designed to accommodate the dietary needs of dozens of different species. Thermal zones maintained different temperature ranges, atmospheric processors adjusted gas mixtures for various respiratory systems, and the food dispensers could produce everything from liquid nutrients to live prey. Marcus watched in fascination as Kira selected her breakfast from the aquatic section. The food appeared to be some kind of processed algae formed into geometric shapes and floating in a bowl of mineral-rich water. "It's more interesting than it looks," Kira said, noticing his expression. "The algae is genetically modified to contain all the nutrients my people need, and the minerals help maintain proper gill function during extended periods out of water." "That's actually really clever," Marcus replied, collecting his own meal from the omnivore section. The dispenser had produced something that looked vaguely like eggs and meat, though he suspected both were synthetic. "On Earth, we have to take supplements when we travel to maintain proper nutrition. This integrated approach is much more elegant." They found a table in the neutral zone, where the atmosphere was kept at standard temperature and pressure. Other students gave them curious glances. Some were probably just interested in the new human, but others were clearly aware of what had happened at the fountain. "So tell me about Earth," Kira said, as she delicately consumed her floating algae shapes. "What's it like to come from a world nobody knows about?" Marcus laughed, though there was a slight edge to it. "Frustrating, mostly. Humans have only been spacefaring for about 200 years, and we've only had contact with the galactic community for 50. We're basically the new kids on the block. But you have faster-than-light travel, obviously, and your technology seems advanced enough to get you accepted into Nexara Academy." "True, but we're still playing catch-up in a lot of ways. Most of our science is adapted from technology we've learned from other species. We're good at taking existing ideas and finding new ways to apply them, but we haven't contributed much that's genuinely original yet." Kira tilted her head in that way that indicated curiosity among her people. "Except for combat, apparently." Marcus paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. "I'm sorry." "What you did to Vex and his friends. I've never seen anything like it. Most species rely on size, natural weapons, or technology for fighting, but you just used physics, like you said. Where did you learn to do that?" "High school," Marcus said, as if this explained everything. When Kira continued to look confused, he elaborated. "Combat training is part of standard education on Earth. Not because we're particularly violent, but because our planet is... well, it's not as safe as most worlds." "What do you mean?" Marcus gestured toward the large windows that offered a view of Zelthara's peaceful countryside. Rolling hills covered in crystalline formations stretched to the horizon under a gentle orange sun. This is a garden world, stable climate, no dangerous wildlife, no natural disasters. Most species in the galaxy evolved on places like this. And Earth isn't like this? Earth is a death world. The words hung in the air between them. Kira's gill slits fluttered as she processed this information. Death world? That's what the Galactic Classification Authority calls it. Category 7 hostile environment, unstable climate, active tectonics, extreme weather patterns, and a biosphere that's essentially one big arms race between predators and prey. Marcus took a bite of his synthetic eggs and continued. Every organism on Earth evolved to either kill or avoid being killed. The herbivores developed speed, armor, toxins, or herd behavior. The predators developed better hunting techniques to overcome those defenses. Then the prey adapted to the new threats, and the predators adapted to the new adaptations. After 4 billion years of that cycle, you end up with a planet full of organisms that are really, really good at survival. And humans are the top predator on this world? Not exactly. We're more like the ultimate generalist. We're not the biggest, strongest, fastest, or most dangerous thing on Earth, but we're adaptable enough to survive in almost any environment and intelligent enough to use tools. Plus, we have something most other species don't have, which is persistence. Marcus's expression grew serious. Humans don't give up. It's hardwired into our psychology. When we decide something needs to be done, we keep trying until either we succeed or we die, sometimes both. Before Kira could respond to this somewhat ominous statement, a new voice interrupted their conversation. "Excuse me, but are you the human?" They looked up to see a tall, graceful being with pale blue skin and elaborate cranial ridges. Marcus recognized the species from his orientation materials. This was a Valorian, one of the more influential species in the galactic community. "I'm a human," Marcus replied carefully. "Marcus Chen. And you are?" "Professor Zenth, Director of Student Affairs." The Valorian's expression was difficult to read, but his tone suggested this was not a social visit. "I need to speak with you about the incident at the fountain this morning." Marcus and Kira exchanged glances. "Of course. Should I come to your office?" "That won't be necessary. Please remain seated." Professor Zenth activated a small device that created a privacy field around their table, dampening sound and preventing eavesdropping. "I've reviewed the security footage and witness statements from this morning's altercation. And? The situation is complicated." Professor Zenth's cranial ridges shifted in what Marcus was learning to recognize as the Valorian equivalent of a frown. "On one hand, you were clearly defending another student from harassment. Academy policy supports intervention in such cases." "On the other hand," Marcus prompted. "On the other hand, you inflicted significant injury on another student. Mock's wrist is broken in 3 places. His family is demanding your expulsion and threatening to involve Brutarian authorities." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I see. However," Professor Zenth continued, "the same family has been notably silent about their son's pattern of behavior toward Miss Kira here. When I reviewed the security archives, I found recordings of similar incidents dating back 3 full cycles. Each time, young Mock participated in forcing Miss Kira into the fountain against her will." Kira's gill slits fluttered in surprise. "You knew?" "The administration was aware of tensions between certain student groups," Professor Zenth admitted. "But without formal complaints or clear evidence of policy violations, our hands were tied. Students are expected to resolve minor social conflicts among themselves." "Forcing someone underwater against their will isn't a minor social conflict," Marcus said quietly. His voice had taken on that same dangerous tone Kira remembered from the fountain. "Where I come from, that's called attempted drowning." "Your species does seem to have a different perspective on physical altercations," Professor Zenth observed. "Which brings me to the real reason I'm here." He produced a data pad and placed it on the table between them. The screen showed what looked like an official document with the seal of the galactic community. 3 hours ago, I received a priority communication from the Department of Xenocultural Studies. It seems your little demonstration this morning has generated quite a bit of interest." Marcus picked up the datapad and read the document. His expression grew increasingly grim as he scrolled through the text. "What is it?" Kira asked. "It's a research proposal," Marcus said slowly. "The department wants to conduct a comprehensive study of human combat capabilities and psychological responses to threat situations." "That doesn't sound so bad," Kira said tentatively. "With me as the test subject," Marcus continued. They want to document human reflexes, pain tolerance, aggression responses, and tactical thinking under controlled conditions. Professor Zenth's ridges shifted again. The proposal has been fast-tracked through the approval process. Apparently, there's significant interest in understanding how a species from a Category 7 world might perform in various conflict scenarios. "Let me guess," Marcus said, his voice getting flatter. "If I refuse to participate, they'll use my altercation with Mach as grounds to have me expelled or deported." "The document doesn't explicitly make that connection," Professor Zenth replied carefully, "but the timing is suggestive." Marcus leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. "Wonderful. So I can either submit to being a lab rat, or I can get kicked out of the best xenobiology program in the galaxy." "There might be a third option," Kira said quietly. Both Marcus and Professor Zenth turned to look at her. "What if Marcus isn't the only human who participates in the study?" "I'm not sure I follow," Professor Zenth said. Kira's eyes were bright with an idea. "The research proposal is based on the assumption that Marcus's behavior this morning was representative of all humans, right? But what if it wasn't? What if the researchers could compare his responses to other humans from different backgrounds and training levels?" Marcus was beginning to see where she was going with this. "You mean, bring more humans to the Academy?" "Exactly. If the galactic community is really interested in understanding human capabilities, they should study a representative sample, not just one individual. And if there are multiple humans here, it becomes a legitimate cultural exchange program instead of just experiments." Professor Zenth considered this. "An interesting proposal, but finding qualified human candidates and arranging for their transport would take time. The research committee is expecting a response within 2 standard days." "Actually," Marcus said, pulling out his communicator, "that might not be as difficult as you think." He activated the device and selected a contact from his directory. After a few moments, a holographic image appeared above the table, a middle-aged human woman with short gray hair and tired eyes. "Marcus? This is unexpected. How's the fancy alien school treating you?" "Hi, Dr. Mitchell. It's complicated. Are you still looking for volunteers for the Xenocultural Immersion Program?" The woman's expression sharpened with interest. "Of course. We've had a waiting list since the program was announced. Why? How fast could you get a team here if the galactic community agreed to fund their transportation and housing?" Dr. Mitchell's image flickered slightly as she turned to check something off-screen. "If they're serious about funding, I could have 12 qualified candidates ready to depart within 24 hours. These are people who've been training for this opportunity for years." Professor Zenth leaned forward with interest. "What qualifications would these candidates have?" "Diverse backgrounds," Dr. Mitchell replied. "Biologists, engineers, doctors, teachers, even a few artists and athletes, all with advanced degrees and cultural sensitivity training. The original idea was to establish a proper human presence in the galactic academic community." "And combat training?" Marcus asked. Dr. Mitchell's expression became slightly puzzled. "Standard Earth education, same as everyone else?" "Why do you ask?" Marcus and Kira exchanged glances. "It's a long story, Dr. Mitchell, but there's a chance to significantly expand the human presence at Nexara Academy. Maybe even establish a permanent cultural exchange program." "I'm listening." Professor Zenth activated his own communicator. "If I may interrupt, I believe I can facilitate this proposal. Dr. Mitchell, I am Professor Zenth, Director of Student Affairs at Nexara Academy. Would your institution be interested in participating in a comprehensive xenocultural study sponsored by the galactic community?" The conversation that followed was rapid and technical, involving funding mechanisms, transportation logistics, and academic protocols. Marcus found himself somewhat sidelined as the two administrators worked out the details of what was rapidly becoming a much larger program than anyone had originally envisioned. Finally, Professor Zenth deactivated his communicator and turned back to Marcus and Kira. Congratulations! Instead of becoming a test subject, you've just become the advanced coordinator for the first major human cultural exchange program in galactic history. Is that good or bad? Marcus asked. That depends entirely on how the next few days go, Professor Zenth replied. The research committee is expecting a demonstration of human capabilities tomorrow morning. If your fellow humans can manage expectations appropriately, this could be the beginning of a very positive development for human galactic relations. And if they can't, then you'll all be on the first transport back to Earth, and humanity's reputation in the galactic community will be somewhat damaged. As if summoned by this ominous prediction, a commotion erupted from across the cafeteria. Marcus turned to see Vex and his friends entering, but they weren't alone. Behind them walked three of the largest beings Marcus had ever seen. "Oh," Professor Zenth said mildly. "I should probably mention that Mock's older brothers arrived on campus about an hour ago." The three massive Brutarians were clearly related to Mock. They shared his four-armed build and intimidating size, but they were even larger and moved with the disciplined precision of military training. Their eyes scanned the cafeteria until they locked onto Marcus's table. "Well," Marcus said, standing up slowly, "this should be interesting." Kira grabbed his arm. "Marcus, don't. Those are war-form Brutarians. They're genetically enhanced for combat. Mock is just a standard civilian variant." "How enhanced are we talking about?" Marcus asked, his tone conversational but his muscles tensing in preparation. "Enhanced enough that they're legally classified as living weapons on most worlds," Professor Zenth said urgently. "Mr. Chen, I strongly advise you to let me handle this situation through proper diplomatic channels." Marcus looked at the three approaching Brutarians, then at Kira's frightened expression, then at the crowd of students who were beginning to panic as they recognized what was walking through their cafeteria. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I'm starting to think the galaxy might need to learn some things about humans that can't be taught in a laboratory." The privacy field flickered and died as the three war-form Brutarians stopped at their table. The largest one, easily 3 meters tall and massing at least 400 kilos, spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "You are the human who injured our bloodkin." "I'm the human who stopped your bloodkin from assaulting another student," Marcus replied calmly. "If he got hurt in the process, maybe you should teach him to pick fights with people his own size." The Brutarian's 4 hands slowly clenched into fists the size of dinner plates. "You will apologize for the injury to our kin. You will submit to rightful punishment. And you will leave this place and never return." Marcus looked around the cafeteria. Every eye was on them. Students from dozens of species watched to see how the strange human would respond to this ultimatum from 3 of the most feared warriors in the galaxy. "Counter-proposal," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the sudden silence. "How about you and your brothers go back to whatever rock you crawled out from under, and I'll pretend this conversation never happened." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Professor Zenth was frantically tapping on his communicator, probably calling for security. Kira was trembling beside Marcus, her gill slits working overtime. The lead Brutarian smiled, revealing teeth like broken glass. "We accept your challenge, human. The training amphitheater, 1 hour. Witnesses will observe as we demonstrate the consequences of insulting Brutarian honor." "Actually," Marcus said, "I was thinking something a little more immediate." Before anyone could react, he picked up his chair and swung it like a club. The impact against the war-form Brutarian's skull produced a sound like a gunshot. The chair shattered into pieces, and the massive warrior staggered backward 3 steps before regaining his balance. He touched his head where the chair had hit him, looked at the blue blood on his fingers, and smiled wider. "Now," he said, "this becomes interesting." The cafeteria erupted into chaos as students fled in all directions. Tables overturned, food scattered across the floor, and alarm systems began wailing as security detected the disturbance. The other two Brutarians spread out to flank Marcus, moving with military precision despite their size. Professor Zenth was shouting something about diplomatic immunity, but his voice was lost in the general pandemonium. Marcus stood in the center of the chaos, surrounded by three of the galaxy's most dangerous warriors, and smiled that cold predator's smile that Kira was beginning to recognize. "You know what the problem with you people is?" he said conversationally as the Brutarians closed in. "You've never learned the most important rule of fighting." "Which is?" the leader growled. Marcus cracked his knuckles and settled into a combat stance that somehow looked wrong to everyone watching. Too low, too balanced, like a predator preparing to pounce. "Never fight a human unless you're prepared to find out what 4 billion years of evolution on a death world actually means." The first Brutarian lunged forward with all four arms extended, expecting to overwhelm the human through sheer size and strength. Instead, Marcus dropped low and swept the warrior's legs, sending 400 kilos of enhanced muscle crashing into an overturned table. The second Brutarian tried to grab Marcus from behind, but found himself holding empty air as the human rolled away and came up swinging a broken table leg like a club. The improvised weapon shattered against the warrior's reinforced exoskeleton, but the impact was enough to stagger him. The third Brutarian, learning from his brother's mistakes, approached more cautiously. This proved to be a mistake, as it gave Marcus time to grab a handful of the scattered food from the floor and hurl it directly into the warrior's eyes. Blinded and enraged, the Brutarian swung wildly, his massive fists demolishing everything within reach. Marcus danced between the blows like water, striking at joints and pressure points with surgical precision. It was at that moment that campus security finally arrived. The security team was composed of various species, but they all carried the same expression of disbelief as they took in the scene. 3 Warform Brutarians, the galaxy's apex warriors, were being systematically dismantled by a single being from a species nobody had heard of. "Should we intervene?" one of the security officers asked his superior. The security chief, a grizzled Valorian with scars from a dozen different conflicts, watched as Marcus somehow managed to use one Brutarian's momentum to send him crashing into another. "Not yet," he said quietly. "I want to see how this ends." It ended 5 minutes later when the last Brutarian finally stayed down after Marcus somehow managed to wrap a table leg around his throat in a chokehold. The human stood in the wreckage of the cafeteria, breathing hard but apparently uninjured, surrounded by 3 unconscious Warform warriors and the stunned silence of everyone who had witnessed the impossible. Professor Zenth was the first to break the silence. "Mr. Chen," he said carefully, "I believe the research committee is going to be very interested in speaking with you." Marcus looked around at the destroyed cafeteria, the unconscious Brutarians, and the crowd of shocked students peering around door frames and overturned tables. "Yeah," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I'm starting to think this might be bigger than just one academic exchange program." In the distance, alarms were still wailing, and Marcus could hear the sound of more vehicles approaching. Security reinforcements, probably. Maybe medical teams for the Brutarians. He looked at Kira, who was staring at him with something between awe and terror. "Still want to be friends?" he asked. Despite everything, she found herself smiling. "I'm starting to think you humans are going to change everything." Marcus considered this as the security teams finally moved in to secure the scene. "You know," he said, "that's exactly what I was hoping to avoid." The medical bay at Nexara Academy had never hosted 3 Warform Brutarians simultaneously. The standard examination tables were too small, requiring the medical staff to wheel in reinforced platforms from the engineering department. Dr. Kesh, the Academy's chief medical officer, moved between her patients with professional efficiency despite her obvious bewilderment. "Concussion, broken ribs, and severe bruising," she reported to Professor Zenth, who stood beside Marcus in the observation area. "The third one has a fractured jaw and what appears to be bite marks on his throat." "Bite marks?" Professor Zenth asked, looking at Marcus with renewed concern. "Not actual bites," Marcus clarified. "I used a table leg to apply pressure to his carotid artery. It's a human restraint technique called a chokehold. Cuts off blood flow to the brain without causing permanent damage." Dr. Kesh's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of extreme confusion in her species. "You rendered a Warform Brutarian unconscious through controlled strangulation, using furniture?" "Improvised weapons are a standard part of human combat training," Marcus explained, as if this were perfectly normal. "We learn to use whatever's available in the environment." "Of course you do," Professor Zenth muttered. "Mr. Chen, I need you to understand something. What you accomplished in that cafeteria should have been impossible. Warform Brutarians are genetically enhanced for combat. Their reflexes are augmented, their strength is tripled, and their pain tolerance is off any reasonable scale. They were also overconfident and untrained for fighting opponents smaller than themselves," Marcus replied. "Size isn't everything in combat. Sometimes being smaller is an advantage." Dr. Kesh finished her examination and approached their group. "The injuries are consistent with blunt force trauma and precision strikes to vulnerable points. Whoever did this has extensive knowledge of Brutarian anatomy and physiology." "I read the medical text during my transport here," Marcus said. 6 months in hyperspace gives you a lot of time to study." "You studied the medical texts to learn how to fight them?" Professor Zenth asked. "I studied the medical texts to learn about my future classmates' basic biology. The combat applications were just a side benefit." Before anyone could respond to this disturbing statement, an alarm chimed throughout the medical bay. Professor Zenth checked his communicator, and his cranial ridges shifted into what Marcus was beginning to recognize as the Valorian equivalent of panic. "The Galactic Council Research Committee has arrived early," he announced. "They're requesting an immediate demonstration of human capabilities." "How immediate?" Marcus asked. "They're waiting in Conference Room Alpha, right now." Marcus looked down at his torn and stained clothing, the result of his impromptu fight with 3 enhanced warriors. "Should I change first?" "There isn't time. The committee includes representatives from 12 major species, including the Brutarian High Command and the Craxian Trade Federation. If we keep them waiting, they'll assume humans don't respect galactic authority," Marcus finished. "Right. Let's go." Conference Room Alpha was designed to accommodate representatives from multiple species, with variable gravity fields, atmospheric processors, and communication systems that could translate between hundreds of languages. As Marcus entered, he could see beings he recognized from his cultural orientation materials. A towering crystalline entity whose body refracted light in complex patterns. A fluid-form Aquarian elder whose consciousness existed partially in hyperspace. And most intimidatingly, a Brutarian High Commander whose war scars told stories of 100 battles. At the head of the table sat Dr. Veltar, a distinguished Valorian who served as the committee's chairman. His expression was unreadable as he gestured for Marcus to take the single empty chair facing the assembled representatives. "Mr. Chen," Dr. Veltar began, "we have reviewed the preliminary reports of your interactions with Academy students. The results are most interesting." "Thank you, sir," Marcus replied, trying to project calm confidence despite being acutely aware that he was facing some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy while covered in debris from a food fight. "Before we proceed," the Brutarian High Commander rumbled, I must inform you that the 3 warriors you defeated were among our finest. They have distinguished themselves in combat against the Hive Queens of Sector 7 and the Crystal Predators of the Neutral Zone. Marcus nodded respectfully. They fought with honor, sir. I meant no disrespect to Brutarian traditions. The High Commander's expression shifted slightly, though Marcus couldn't interpret the change. You claim they fought with honor, yet you defeated them using what my reports describe as furniture and food items. Improvised weapons and environmental advantages are legitimate combat tactics, Marcus replied. On Earth, we have a saying, adapt, improvise, overcome. The weapons don't matter as much as the warrior's will to win. Interesting philosophy, the crystalline entity chimed, its voice like wind through crystal formations. But we must address the central question. Are you representative of your species' capabilities, or are you an exceptional individual? Before Marcus could answer, the conference room doors opened to admit Professor Zenth and a figure that made Marcus's heart leap with relief. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, director of Earth's Xenocultural Program, entered accompanied by 12 humans Marcus didn't recognize. Apologies for the interruption, Dr. Mitchell announced, but the human delegation has arrived ahead of schedule. We thought it best to participate in these discussions directly. Dr. Veltar gestured to the additional seating that materialized from the room's adaptive architecture. Of course. Dr. Mitchell, I presume, your reputation precedes you. As the humans took their seats, Marcus got his first good look at his fellow delegates. They were a diverse group representing various ages, ethnicities, and professional backgrounds. But something about their posture and the way they moved reminded him of trained soldiers. Dr. Mitchell noticed his expression and smiled slightly. Mr. Chen, allow me to introduce your colleagues, all volunteers for the Cultural Exchange Program and all graduates of Earth's Advanced Survival Academy. I don't understand, the fluid form Aquarian representative said, its translated voice carrying confusion. What is an Advanced Survival Academy? Mandatory education for anyone planning to represent humanity in potentially dangerous environments, Dr. Mitchell explained. Earth's biosphere is challenging. Anyone who travels off-world receives training in combat, emergency medicine, resource procurement, and threat assessment. All humans receive this training? The Craxian trade representative asked, mandibles clicking with interest. All humans who leave Earth, confirmed Dr. Mitchell. It's considered basic safety protocol. The committee members exchanged glances that Marcus couldn't interpret, but he sensed this wasn't the answer they had expected. Dr. Veltar activated a holographic display showing footage from Marcus's encounters with the Academy students. Dr. Mitchell, we've reviewed Mr. Chen's performance in several combat situations. Would you say these results are typical of human capabilities? Dr. Mitchell watched the footage with professional interest. Marcus appears to have been holding back significantly, she observed. Probably trying not to cause permanent injury to his opponents. Holding back? The Brutarian High Commander demanded. Of course. Look at his movement patterns. He's staying defensive, using minimal force, focusing on disabling rather than destroying. If he had been fighting seriously, those encounters would have lasted seconds rather than minutes. The silence in the room was profound. Perhaps, Dr. Veltar said carefully, we should proceed with the planned demonstration. We've prepared a series of scenarios designed to test various aspects of human capabilities. What kind of scenarios? One of the newly arrived humans asked. Marcus recognized her as Dr. Lisa Park, an exobiologist whose papers he had studied during the transport. Combat simulations primarily. We're interested in understanding how humans adapt to unfamiliar opponents and environments. Dr. Park exchanged glances with her colleagues. I think there may be a misunderstanding about our purpose here. We're academics, not soldiers. But you all have combat training, the crystalline entity observed. Of course. But that's like saying we all have training in swimming or climbing. It's basic survival skills, not our primary expertise. The committee members began conferring among themselves in rapid whispers. Marcus caught fragments of conversation in various languages, most of which seemed to center on concepts like death world conditioning and apex predator psychology. Finally, Dr. Veltar called for order. Dr. Mitchell, perhaps you could help us understand something. Your species comes from what our classification system designates as a Category 7 hostile environment, yet you describe combat training as routine education. How do you reconcile this? Dr. Mitchell considered the question seriously. I think the issue is one of perspective. Earth isn't hostile to us, it's home. We evolved there, adapted to its challenges. What you see as an impossibly dangerous environment, we see as normal background conditions. Normal background conditions, the Aquarian elder repeated slowly, including the presence of megafauna, active tectonics, extreme weather patterns, and viral pandemics? Among other things, yes. Dr. Chen, would you say that's accurate? Marcus nodded. Earth has mountain ranges that reach above the breathable atmosphere, storms that can level cities, and predators that hunt in coordinated packs. But it also has incredible beauty and diversity. We don't think of it as a death world. It's just the world that made us who we are. And who you are, the Brutarian High Commander said slowly, are persistence hunters from an apex predator species with military training as standard education. When you put it that way, it sounds kind of intimidating, Dr. Park admitted. But from our perspective, we're just curious beings who like to explore and learn new things. The committee spent several minutes in hurried consultation. Finally, Dr. Veltar turned back to the humans. We believe there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of this evaluation. We were expecting to study an unusual individual. Instead, we appear to have encountered a species whose baseline capabilities exceed our understanding of normal parameters. What does that mean exactly? Dr. Mitchell asked. It means, the crystalline entity chimed, that we need to completely reconsider how we approach human integration into galactic society. Over the next several hours, what had been planned as a simple demonstration evolved into an extensive cultural exchange. The humans answered questions about Earth's environment, history, and social structures, while the committee representatives shared information about their own worlds and civilizations. The picture that emerged was both fascinating and concerning. Every other species in the galactic community had evolved on relatively stable, peaceful worlds. They had developed technology and civilization without the constant environmental pressures that shaped human evolution. The concept of routine combat training was as foreign to them as their peaceful development was to the humans. This explains a great deal, Dr. Veltar observed as the session wound down. Your species' rapid technological development, your adaptability to new environments, your apparent comfort with risk and uncertainty. We're not unusually aggressive, Dr. Mitchell assured him. We just have a different perspective on problem solving. Yes, the Brutarian High Commander agreed. You treat impossible odds as interesting challenges rather than insurmountable obstacles. As the formal session concluded, Professor Zenth approached Marcus. Mr. Chen, there's still the matter of your original situation. The bullying incident that started all of this. What about it? Vex and his associates have formally withdrawn their complaints and requested transfers to different dormitory buildings. Apparently, the prospect of sharing living space with a human has lost its appeal. Marcus looked surprised. They don't need to transfer. I'm not going to hunt them down or anything. I think that's precisely what worries them, Professor Zenth replied with what might have been amusement. The uncertainty of not knowing what you might do. Dr. Mitchell overheard this exchange and frowned. Marcus, you weren't actually planning to pursue further conflict, were you? Of course not. They learned their lesson. I learned mine. Everyone moves forward. What lesson did you learn? Kira asked. She had been quietly observing the proceedings from a corner of the room. Marcus considered this. That the galaxy is a lot more peaceful than I expected. Most species haven't had to develop the same survival instincts we have. I need to be more careful about how I respond to threats that probably aren't as serious as they seem to me. And what lesson did Vex learn? Kira continued. That picking fights with strangers is a bad idea when you don't know what they're capable of. Dr. Veltar approached their small group. Mr. Chen, Miss Kira, I want you to know that this entire incident has prompted the Council to approve a major expansion of the Human Exchange Program. We're establishing a permanent human cultural center here at Nexara Academy, with Dr. Mitchell serving as the first director. That's wonderful news, Kira said, though she looked thoughtful. But what happens to students like me? The ones who were having trouble before all this started? Actually, Dr. Park interjected, that's something we'd like to address. One of the things we've learned today is that bullying apparently isn't a common problem in galactic society. Most species are naturally cooperative and conflict avoidant, which makes it all the more serious when it does occur, Dr. Mitchell added. We're proposing a new program where human students can serve as advocates and protectors for students who are experiencing harassment. Like a big brother or sister program? Marcus asked. Something like that. Humans seem to have a natural protective instinct that could be valuable here. Kira's gill slits fluttered with what Marcus now recognized as excitement. You mean other students wouldn't have to go through what I experienced? That's the idea, Dr. Mitchell confirmed, though we'll need volunteers from both the human and non-human student populations to make it work. I volunteer, Marcus said immediately. As do I, Kira added. I want to help other students avoid what happened to me. As the group began discussing the details of the new program, Marcus found himself thinking about the day's events. He had come to Nexara Academy hoping to learn about alien cultures and maybe make some friends. Instead, he had apparently helped trigger a major shift in how humans were perceived by the galactic community. Dr. Mitchell, he said during a lull in the conversation, do you think we've made things better or worse? She considered this carefully. I think we've made things more honest, she replied. The galaxy needed to understand what humans are really like, not just what they imagined us to be based on our diplomatic communications. And what are we really like? We're a species that doesn't give up, doesn't back down from challenges, and instinctively protects others who need protection. That might seem intimidating to species that evolved in peaceful environments, but it's also exactly what the galaxy needs right now. What do you mean? Dr. Mitchell gestured toward the conference table where several committee members were still engaged in intense discussion. The galactic community has been stable for thousands of years because everyone plays by the same rules, but stability can become stagnation. Sometimes you need someone who thinks differently to shake things up. By throwing bullies into fountains, by demonstrating that there are other ways to solve problems, ways that might not occur to species that have never had to fight for survival. As the day finally wound to a close, Marcus and Kira walked together across the academy campus. The fountain in the central courtyard had been repaired and was once again cycling through its complex patterns of liquid art. You know, Kira said, I never thanked you properly for what you did. You don't need to thank me. I just did what seemed right. That's exactly why I need to thank you. On my world, we have a concept called the deep current. It's the idea that some individuals have a natural flow that carries others along with them toward better places. That's a beautiful concept. I think you have a deep current, Marcus. And I think it's going to carry a lot of people toward better places. Marcus looked around the campus, thinking about all the changes that would be coming. More humans, new programs, different ways of thinking about old problems. I hope you're right, he said. But I have a feeling the real work is just beginning. Above them, The first stars were becoming visible in Zelthara's darkening sky. Among them, Marcus knew, was a small yellow star that warmed a blue-green world where 4 billion years of evolution had created a species that refused to give up, refused to back down, and instinctively protected those who needed protection. He smiled and headed toward his dormitory. Tomorrow, there would be new challenges, new opportunities to learn and grow and maybe help make the galaxy a little bit better. After all, that's what humans did.